There is a particular quality to the person who moves through the world without the usual emotional static. They do not react when others expect reaction. They do not explain when others demand explanation. They do not perform the warmth that society scripts for every interaction, the smile that costs nothing, the enthusiasm that signals belonging, the vulnerability that invites connection. They are cold, and this coldness, far from being the deficiency that popular psychology diagnoses it as, is often the most sophisticated psychological adaptation that a human being can develop. It is not the absence of feeling. It is the strategic management of feeling. It is not a wound. It is a weapon, and like all weapons, it can be used for destruction or for the precise defense of something worth protecting. The culture hates coldness. It pathologizes it. It calls it avoidant attachment, emotional unavailability, narcissistic defense, alexithymia. It sends the cold person to therapy to melt them, to restore them to the warm, reactive, emotionally legible state that makes others comfortable. But this cultural hostility is not neutral. It is interested. The warm person is readable. They are predictable. They are manipulable. Their emotions are on the surface, available for stimulation, for soothing, for exploitation. The cold person is opaque. Their reactions cannot be reliably triggered. Their compliance cannot be purchased with the usual currencies of approval, guilt, or social pressure. And this opacity makes them inconvenient. It makes them uncontrollable. It makes them, in a very real sense, free. To understand why coldness works, you must first understand the economy of emotional exchange that governs most human interaction. Every relationship is a market, not necessarily a cynical or exploitative market, but a market nonetheless. People trade attention for validation, care for security, loyalty for belonging, vulnerability for intimacy. And in every market, information is power. The person who reveals their emotional state reveals their price. They reveal what soothes them, what threatens them, what they cannot bear to lose. And once this information is revealed, it becomes leverage. The warm person, in their openness, is constantly leaking leverage. They are a walking inventory of vulnerabilities, and the skilled operator knows exactly how to access the inventory when they need something. The cold person does not leak. They do not trade in the currency of emotional transparency. They maintain what you might call informational asymmetry, a deliberate imbalance in what others know about them versus what they know about others. This asymmetry is not achieved through deception. The cold person is not necessarily a liar. They are simply selective. They answer questions without revealing. They engage without exposing. They participate in the emotional economy without becoming a commodity within it. And this selectivity creates a power dynamic that is invisible to those who have never experienced it. The other person, accustomed to the usual flow of emotional exchange, finds themselves disoriented. They cannot read the cold person. They cannot predict their reactions. They cannot manipulate them through the standard channels. And in this disorientation, they often reveal more than they intended, trying to elicit the response that never comes. This is why coldness works in negotiation. It works in leadership. It works in any domain where the ability to maintain composure under pressure creates advantage. The person who does not react cannot be baited. The person who does not explain cannot be cornered. The person who does not plead cannot be refused with the satisfaction of seeing them suffer. Coldness removes the reward that the other person expected from their aggression, their manipulation, their power play. And without that reward, the behavior often simply stops. The bully finds no pleasure in tormenting someone who does not flinch. The manipulator finds no leverage against someone who does not care about their approval. The emotional terrorist finds no explosion to trigger when the target remains frozen. But the psychology of coldness goes deeper than strategy. It is also a response to a specific kind of developmental environment. The cold person was not born cold. They were made cold, usually through repeated exposure to situations where emotional expression was punished rather than rewarded. The child who cries and is mocked learns not to cry. The child who expresses need and is met with indifference learns not to need. The child who trusts and is betrayed learns not to trust. These are not pathological responses. They are rational adaptations to irrational conditions. The coldness is the scar tissue that forms over wounds that would otherwise keep bleeding. And while the culture sees the scar and calls it ugly, the person who carries it knows that it is the only thing that kept them intact. This is where the dark self-help perspective becomes essential. The conventional narrative tells the cold person that they are damaged, that they need to heal, that their coldness is preventing them from the rich, warm relationships that are the supposed birthright of every human being. But this narrative assumes that warmth is always available, always safe, always rewarded. It assumes a world of secure attachment and trustworthy caregivers that the cold person has never inhabited. For the cold person, warmth was not a resource, it was a risk. And the decision to become cold was not a mistake. It was a survival calculation that worked. The question is not whether to eliminate the coldness. The question is whether the coldness is still serving the purpose for which it was developed, and whether it can be deployed strategically rather than compulsively. The strategic deployment of coldness requires what you might call thermal regulation, the capacity to be warm when warmth serves your interests, and cold when coldness protects them. This is not the same as the warm person's performative warmth, or the damaged person's frozen withdrawal. It is the conscious choice of emotional temperature based on context, goal, and risk assessment. The thermally regulated person can be charming at a networking event because charm opens doors. They can be compassionate with a trusted friend because compassion deepens bonds that have proven their value. And they can be ice to a manipulator because ice is the only language that manipulators understand. This flexibility is the mark of genuine psychological sophistication. It is the difference between a person who is trapped in their coldness and a person who has mastered it. The cold person who has not achieved this mastery is often trapped in a different way. They are cold to everyone, all the time, because they have never learned to distinguish between safe and unsafe environments. Their coldness is not a choice but a default, a blanket defense that protects them from harm, but also prevents them from connection. This is the coldness that looks like isolation, like loneliness, like the slow erosion of the capacity for pleasure. And it is this coldness that the culture correctly identifies as problematic. But the solution is not to eliminate coldness. The solution is to teach discernment, to help the cold person recognize that some environments are safe for warmth, that some people have earned access, that the defense developed for war is not necessary in peace. This is the work of maturation, not the work of healing. It is the development of judgment, not the restoration of innocence. The benefits of coldness, properly understood, are extensive. The cold person does not suffer from the anxiety of social approval that consumes the warm person. They do not lie awake at night replaying conversations, wondering if they said the wrong thing, if they were liked enough, if they performed their warmth adequately. Their self-esteem is not hostage to the opinions of others because they have withdrawn it from the market. They do not experience rejection as devastation because they have not invested their identity in the acceptance of the rejecter. They do not experience betrayal as a surprise because they have never assumed that others are operating from loyalty rather than self-interest. Their emotional life is, in many ways, more stable than the emotional life of the person who is constantly open to the weather of social interaction. This stability is often mistaken for emptiness. The warm person, looking at the cold person, assumes that they feel nothing, that they are dead inside, that they have lost the capacity for the rich emotional experience that makes life worth living. But this assumption is a projection. The cold person feels. They simply do not perform their feelings for an audience. They do not use their emotions as social currency. They do not require external validation to confirm that their feelings are real. And in this, they often experience a depth of emotion that the warm person cannot access, because the warm person's emotions are constantly being diluted by performance, by management, by the need to be seen, feeling the right thing at the right time. The cold person's emotions are private, concentrated, undiluted. They are felt in the dark, without witness, and they are therefore more purely their own. The cold person also possesses a clarity of perception that the warm person lacks. Emotions are information, but they are also distortion. Fear makes threats seem larger. Love makes flaws seem smaller. Anger makes offenses seem intentional. The warm person is constantly navigating through this fog of emotional distortion, trying to see reality through the lens of their feelings. The cold person has, to a significant degree, cleared the fog. They can see the social dynamics of a room within minutes. They can identify the power structures, the alliances, the vulnerabilities, the agendas, because they are not blinded by the need to be liked, to belong, to be seen as warm. They are observers first, participants second, and this observational distance gives them a cognitive advantage that is difficult to overstate. This advantage is particularly pronounced in crisis, when situations become chaotic, when emotions run high, when the warm person is overwhelmed by fear or grief or rage. The cold person remains operational. They can make decisions. They can assess risk. They can act rather than react. This is why cold people are often drawn to high-stakes professions, emergency medicine, military command, financial trading, criminal law. These are environments where emotional reactivity is not just unhelpful but dangerous. The cold person thrives here not because they lack feeling, but because they have learned to compartmentalize it, to suspend it until the crisis has passed, to maintain functional clarity when others are drowning in their own neurochemistry. The romantic implications of coldness are where the culture's hostility is most intense. The cold person is labeled as emotionally unavailable, as incapable of intimacy, as a commitment phobe or a narcissist. And there is a version of this that is true. The person who is compulsively cold, who cannot access warmth under any circumstances, who uses coldness as a permanent fortress rather than a strategic tool, will struggle to form the deep bonds that most people desire. But there is another version that the culture refuses to acknowledge. The cold person, when they choose to connect, connects deeply. Their intimacy is not the performative intimacy of constant communication, of emotional disclosure as social ritual, of the merged identity that popular psychology celebrates. It is a quieter, more selective intimacy. It is the choice to reveal, to trust, to be vulnerable with a specific person who has earned that access through consistent behavior over time. And this earned intimacy is often more durable, more genuine, and more satisfying than the automatic intimacy that the warm person offers to everyone and therefore to no one. The cold person's love, when it exists, is not needy. It is not anxious. It does not require constant reassurance or validation. It is a choice, renewed daily, to remain connected to someone who has demonstrated their worth. And because it is a choice rather than a compulsion, it is more stable. It does not fluctuate with mood or circumstance. It does not dissolve in the face of conflict or distance. The cold person does not love easily, but they love deeply, and their love is not diluted by the need to be loved in return. They can love someone who does not love them back, not in the masochistic way of the anxious attachment style, but in the self-contained way of someone whose emotional state is not hostage to the other's response. This is not the love of fairy tales. It is the love of adults, grounded, realistic, and ultimately more sustainable than the passionate fusion that burns bright and dies fast. The professional advantages of coldness are equally significant and equally misunderstood. The warm person is constantly managing relationships, smoothing feathers, maintaining harmony, absorbing the emotional labor of the group. This labor is real, it is exhausting, and it is almost never compensated. The cold person declines this labor. They do not mediate conflicts that are not theirs. They do not soothe egos that have not earned their attention. They do not perform the emotional maintenance that keeps dysfunctional teams functioning, and in declining this labor, they free up cognitive and temporal resources for the work that actually matters. They are not distracted by the soap opera of office politics. They are not drained by the need to be liked. They can focus, produce, and advance with a single-mindedness that the warm person, however talented, cannot match. This focus is often mistaken for ruthlessness. The cold person makes decisions that affect people, and they make these decisions without the emotional hand-wringing that the warm person would exhibit. They fire the underperformer. They end the unprofitable project. They restructure the team. And they do these things with a calm that seems to the warm observer inhuman. But this calm is not cruelty. It is the absence of the emotional distortion that makes difficult decisions harder than they need to be. The cold person can see that the underperformer is not improving, that the project is bleeding resources, that the team is better off restructured. They can see this clearly because they are not clouded by empathy for the underperformer, by attachment to the project, by loyalty to the current team configuration. They see the numbers, they see the logic, and they act on it. This is not a lack of feeling, it is a triumph of reason over feeling, and it is the foundation of effective leadership. The dark side of coldness, and it must be acknowledged, is the capacity for cruelty that it enables. The person who does not feel the usual emotional signals can ignore the suffering they cause. They can exploit without guilt. They can destroy without remorse. They can use their clarity as a weapon rather than a tool. This is the coldness of the sociopath, and it is real, and it is dangerous. But it is not the only form of coldness. It is the form that has never been tempered by any warmth, that has never developed the discernment to distinguish between legitimate defense and predatory aggression. The mature cold person has this discernment. They know that their capacity for detachment can be used to harm, and they choose not to use it that way. Not because they fear punishment, though they may, not because they seek approval, though they might, but because they have decided through whatever process of self-examination they have undertaken that they do not want to be the kind of person who causes unnecessary suffering. This decision is not emotional. It is rational, ethical, and ultimately more stable than the warm person's avoidance of cruelty through simple inability to imagine it. The development of healthy coldness, if that is your goal, requires several stages. First, you must recognize your own coldness. Many cold people do not know that they are cold. They think they are simply rational, controlled, unaffected by the drama that consumes others. This self-perception is partially true, but incomplete. The recognition requires honest self-examination, ideally with feedback from people who have experienced your coldness from the outside. What do they see that you do not? How do they experience your lack of reaction? What do they wish you would provide that you do not? This feedback is not an indictment. It is data. And the cold person, above all, should value data. Second, you must trace the origins of your coldness. When did it develop? What was the environment that made it necessary? What were the specific experiences that taught you that emotional expression was dangerous? This tracing is not about blame, it is about understanding. The coldness was adaptive, it served a purpose. And understanding that purpose allows you to evaluate whether the adaptation is still necessary. If you are no longer in the environment that created your coldness, you may be able to relax it in contexts where it is no longer protective. If you are still in that environment, or in environments that are similarly threatening, your coldness remains a necessary defense. Do not let the culture convince you to drop your shield in a war zone. Third, you must develop thermoregulation. This is the capacity to modulate your coldness based on context, to be warm with those who have earned your trust, to be cold with those who have demonstrated their threat, to be neutral with those about whom you have insufficient information. This modulation requires attention, practice, and the willingness to make mistakes. You will sometimes be too cold with someone who deserved warmth. You will sometimes be too warm with someone who exploited it. These mistakes are feedback. Adjust, learn, improve. The goal is not perfection. The goal is strategic flexibility. Fourth, you must accept the social cost. The culture does not like cold people. You will be misunderstood. You will be called names. You will be excluded from spaces that value performative warmth over genuine competence. This cost is real, and you must decide whether you are willing to pay it. If you are not, you can learn to perform warmth when necessary, to code switch between your natural coldness and the social requirement of warmth. This performance is not inauthentic. It is adaptation. The chameleon does not feel guilty for changing color. But if you choose not to perform, if you choose to be cold consistently, you must accept that this choice will limit your access to certain opportunities and certain relationships. This is not unfair. This is simply the price of the identity you have chosen. Fifth, you must find your people. Coldness is isolating, and isolation is corrosive over time. You need at least a few relationships where your coldness is understood, accepted, even appreciated. These may be other cold people. They may be warm people who have the maturity to recognize that your coldness is not a rejection of them. They may be people who value what your coldness provides: stability, clarity, reliability, the absence of drama. These relationships will be few. They will be hard-won, but they will be real in a way that performative relationships never are. And they will sustain you in the moments when the cost of your coldness feels too high. The ultimate question is not whether coldness is good or bad. It is whether coldness is working for you. If your coldness is preventing you from achieving your goals, from forming the connections you want, from experiencing the life you desire, then it is not working. But if your coldness is protecting you from exploitation, enabling your clarity, supporting your stability, and allowing you to operate effectively in environments where others are paralyzed by emotion, then it is working, and the culture's judgment of it is irrelevant. You are not here to be warm. You are here to be effective. You are here to be real. You are here to build a life that is genuinely yours, and if coldness is the tool that allows you to do that, then coldness is not your flaw. It is your feature. The psychology of being cold is the psychology of self-protection in a world that rewards emotional transparency with exploitation. It is the psychology of clarity in a world that clouds perception with the fog of feeling. It is the psychology of stability in a world that oscillates between manic enthusiasm and depressive despair. And it works not because it eliminates feeling, but because it manages feeling. Not because it rejects connection, but because it selects connection. Not because it denies humanity, but because it defines humanity on its own terms rather than on the terms of those who would manipulate it. Be cold if you need to be. Be warm when you choose to be, but never let the culture dictate your temperature. Never apologize for the defense that kept you alive. Never perform warmth to make others comfortable at the expense of your own integrity. Your coldness is your own. It was forged in fires that others did not feel. It has carried you through storms that would have drowned the warm. And if you have learned to wield it with precision, with discernment, with the capacity to warm when warmth is warranted, then you have achieved something that the culture does not understand and cannot teach. You have achieved sovereignty over your own emotional life, and that sovereignty is the foundation of every genuine power you will ever possess. The world will tell you that you need to open up, to let people in, to be vulnerable, to feel more. The world will sell you therapies and workshops and books designed to melt your ice, but the world does not know what you know. The world has not walked your path. The world has not paid your price. And the world's prescription for your coldness is designed for its comfort, not for your flourishing. You know what you need. You know what you have survived. And you know, if you are honest with yourself, whether your coldness is a prison or a palace. If it is a prison, then by all means do the work to escape it. But if it is a palace, then defend it. Decorate it. Invite in only those who deserve to see its interior, and let the rest of the world shiver at its gates. They were never going to keep you warm anyway.